will.
All right. Welcome back to the Real Estate Standard Podcast, episode 13, where commercial real estate and Bitcoin collide. I'm your host, Tim Kotzman. I'm here with Kenny Alves and Chris Drizga. Each episode here, we break down how serious operators, investors, and developers stay competitive and profitable in the 21st century by examining commercial real estate through the lens of Bitcoin. On today's episode, we're discussing how tenants and owner-occupants approach their real estate needs, both from a business and investment perspective. But first, Kenny is going to give us an update on the West Main Storage stacking, and I'm going to share that screen.
Thanks, Tim. As of today, March 23rd, our total Bitcoin holdings are just over 3.5 Bitcoin. We're at 3.61 Bitcoin. And our stacking year to date, we're at almost at 1.5 Bitcoin at 143 million Satoshis. And you can see the dashboard looks a little different today. We did an update to kind of separate the Bitcoin statistics and KPIs from the digital credit and the real estate to make it a little bit easier to see everything. As you can see, our Bitcoin holdings now cover 11.2 months of mortgage payments. Our Satoshis per square foot, I think that's going to be on the other one, got a little disoriented, but our Satoshis per square foot are at 5,213 sats per square foot. And announced earlier on a few episodes before, we have purchased $200,000 worth of stretch, about 2,014 shares. We received one payment. We're anticipating our next payment at the end of this month. In about a week, we'll receive our second payment there. And that's going to boost our NOI by roughly 3% annually if we don't add any more by the end of the year. So what do you think, Chris? What do you think of the new dashboard?
I really like it. Go back up to the top there. Let me see the digital credit section. So 200K on the stretch buy, monthly dividend. Okay.
Just separates a little bit. There's the it looks like there's some bug here. We're gonna have to fix it, but it's mostly correct.
Yeah, I like how you separate it. That's super helpful, just to separate it all out. And I also liked in the last couple of episodes here, you've broken down the stretch purchase into additional storage units. What was that breakdown again? The 200,000 in stretch was equivalent to how many additional units?
It's roughly 6.15 10 by 10 climate controlled units. So there's two class of storage units, really. There's non-climate control, old school drive up units. And then there's interior climate controlled, where the temperature is either cooled or warmed up in the colder states at certain times of the year. And it's the equivalent of 6 additional 10 by 10 units. And the other way you could look at it is it's about 15 or 16 or so 5 by 5 climate controlled units. So we're adding real cash flow that has no drag, as we pointed out on last week's episode, where profit margins on physical storage units are roughly half after expenses. So and that's before debt service. So yeah, there's no expenses that come with holding stretch. There's no management fee that we have to pay. It doesn't cost anything to hold it in the brokerage account. So it's 100% profit.
The digital tenants are the best tenants, is what I'm hearing. What, just out of curiosity, what are you getting? So what does that break down on a per unit basis? What would you be getting on those climate controlled units per month?
So I can take you over to our storage units now, just so you can kind of get an idea. Let's see here. So a 10 by 10 is currently renting for $289 a month.
Yeah, and your profit margin's half of that after expenses.
Yeah, roughly half.
Yeah, I'm just kind of talking through it so the listeners can kind of get some context for it. I mean, you're bringing in 5 to 6 depending on if they're climate controlled or not. I mean, the fact that there's no drag, there's no ongoing expenses, that is incredibly valuable. You go to add, if you can even add the additional footage on a building, there's a long lead time and there's significant costs along the way to do that. It's not something you see people do every day because the time, the costs, and the expertise that is required to get that done. And that's applicable for storage facilities, office buildings, warehouses, retail centers, really the entire, all the property types at the end of the day. So I think this is just going to, that much further in proving out this whole strategy, right? We're not replacing real estate. We're not selling real estate and running for the hills. We are using these new tools to enhance and strengthen the real estate asset. And the digital tenant, the digital rent, however you want to look at that, it's just another tool in the toolbox, and it's able to, you're able to create a new revenue stream that is uncorrelated to the real estate property, and it allows you to keep pace with monetary debasement and build and maintain your reserves so that you can operate the property at a high level, a high standard. You can invest and renovate in the property, or if you have excess, you go out and scale your portfolio. So the optionality is extensive, and I think a lot of people are discounting that. Unfortunately. So again, just kind of bringing it full circle, you look at some of these metrics and how they've improved. We've only been doing this since the beginning of the year, right? I mean, we're barely 3 months in, and you've almost doubled your Satoshis per square foot, and you've almost doubled your monthly mortgage payment coverage. We were hovering in that high 7, low 8 range for it felt like a long time. And now I think that was 11.3 today, something like that. So again, this is where you're proving it out in real time. And I'm really happy that we're, proving out the overall thesis.
Yeah. I was doing, just looking at historical performance recently, and I can just see where we're kind of, we've done such a great job at leasing up the facility and getting into the 90% occupancy range and maintaining it. And we added solar. We did one expansion about 7, 8 years ago now. And, I was joking around when we said Stretch is the tenant that you lease to once you're already full, because we've already expanded. The property is maximized. We've already done this big expansion. We've filled up the roof with solar panels. We actually have 2 arrays, one that produces electricity for the building itself, and we use those credits to pay our electric expense. And then the second array, which is larger, all the energy produced is being sold to the grid in a power purchase agreement to the Rhode Island Energy. They purchased National Grid, at least the territory in Rhode Island. And yeah, so you're kind of looking for ways to maximize rent, and instead of increasing rents, which we do from time to time, there's really not many other ways to increase your net operating income. So you have to go digital. And I think that's, where we arrived.
Yeah, excellent. I think that's a good place to kind of pivot into today's topic. And this one's actually a little near and dear to my heart because in my brokerage business, the owner user space is, a large part of my personal business and a lot of my experience. So I'm excited to run through it today. And, for those that are unfamiliar with what we're talking about here, is in commercial real estate, you have what we've been talking about up to this point is really from a true 100% investment perspective, right? You're looking at the real estate from an investment perspective. What kind of returns can I get? What kind of leases do I have in place? What kind of tenants are those leases from? How can I optimize the operation and ultimately the financial performance of said asset? And that's a large part of the business. That's where most people think and go to when they're having this conversation. But there is just as large of the industry that is owner occupied. So what that means is a business owner, large, medium, or small, they are electing to buy the property and move their business into that property for operational reasons, and there's a handful of other issues or reasons that they would do that. We'll get into that here shortly. But they're basically owning and controlling the real estate, the primary purpose being for their business, right? And that could be a manufacturer, a distributor, maybe it's a law firm. There's a whole industry or sub-industry, if you will, for this type of real estate. And I'm excited to kind of break down some of these points here today, because I think a lot of people overlook that, and they think it's, I have a business, I have to go lease space, and that has its pros and cons as well. But there's really an alternative option that has proven incredibly powerful and beneficial over the last 20, 30 years or so. So what say you, Kenny, on that?
Well, self-storage is technically like a kind of owner operator, right? It has like an operating side more than just a retail shopping center or something where you're just leasing out the space as the operating business, as the management side. So, I know that there's some other businesses like I'm curious to see what you see coming in your doors as a broker. Like what I'm sure that there's like a bunch of businesses that kind of graduate to a point where they're cash flowing. It might be like a restaurant. I could see like a guy in a food truck moving into like a retail shopping area, and then eventually wanting to build his own custom, restaurant with all the perks of designing a kitchen and the floor plan and the outdoor seating. And so I'm kind of curious what what kind of operations you see going in that direction, where they graduate from leasing a space to buying a building, and then maybe even subletting or like leasing out portion of the building. I think as long as it's considered owner operator, as long as they occupy 50% more of the space.
Yeah,
But
51.
yeah, 51. So I'm I'm kind of curious what you see in your day to day, brokerage activity, where what kind of businesses are looking for that ownership.
Yeah, great question. I mean, it generally it's any business really. I've seen all kinds of businesses transition from being a tenant into an owner scenario. To get a little bit more specific, you'll see a large, like if you have a very specialized type of business, specialized equipment, think of like a manufacturer, some kind of plant, some kind of facility where not only the real estate is very customized, but all of the FF&E, the fixtures, furniture, and equipment that goes into the facility, very expensive, very costly to move. Maybe their use, the type of business has we call it dirty. Maybe there's an environmental component to it. Maybe there's, I'm thinking about there's a client I have that is in the tile business, and they're in this facility cutting tile. They're using all this specialized equipment. There's water, there's dust. It's filthy, right? So it's a more dirty use. Whether it's the specialized equipment or it's the specific type of use and the output that they're doing, those guys typically opt to own their real estate because they need to control it, right? Whether for all those different reasons, they cannot be, at the whims of a landlord or real estate market, having to renegotiate a lease every 3, 5, 10 years, having the real estate costs fluctuate, up or down, potentially the landlord selling the property, them having to vote. There's a whole host of issues for those special types of uses. But going back to your initial comment, I like the way you kind of phrased it, and you used the word progression, and that's exactly how you should think about it. Is you go start a business today, right? You're not going out and buying real estate day one, right? There's obviously one-offs where that happens, but most people start the business, they're bootstrapping it. They get big enough, they go lease space, they hire people, they operate for a handful of years, and they get to a certain point where it makes sense to diversify their balance sheet, essentially, right? Transition from that tenant environment to owning the real estate, because it gives them that control, because it has a wealth building mechanism to it as well. So I think I answered your question there, but you think of, leasing is not terrible, right? Most people lease, and there's a lot of benefits. Leasing, you get to maintain your working capital, right? For whatever needs you may have. Leasing allows you the ability to access nicer locations, more premier locations that maybe you wouldn't otherwise be able to afford. And you can also, because you're leasing typically on 3 to 5 year terms, you can respond to changes in the marketplace, right? Think of COVID the last 5, 6 years here with all this remote work and work from home. All the people that had, 5-year leases in place and they were allocating 350 feet per person. When that lease expired, a lot of them took that as an opportunity to right size their space. And now, hey, we don't need 350 a person anymore. Maybe we only need 200 a person, right? So there are some benefits to leasing. I don't want to, make it sound like it's a terrible idea. I'd even add into, the leasing side, just the way that we talk about real estate through the lens of Bitcoin. I would probably make the argument that a lot of people should be leasing their space these days because of the transitionary period we're going through and how people think about and store and transact value. Right?
Yeah, you got me thinking. Like I got, we've done as developers on the developer side. I don't want to pivot too much, but you made an interesting point about, like, sometimes it's a necessity to own the property if you're like going to be doing auto repairs or something, like the dirty stuff, like you said, because as a property owner, I wouldn't want to lease to someone like a textile company or something that could potentially, damage the value of the property by contaminating it. We've done phase 2 studies from, with the DEM, trying to clean up properties before, and it can be expensive and time consuming. And so that's another kind of, area where I haven't really spent much time in with the auto repair shops and stuff like that, but they almost have to buy the property because nobody's gonna lease to like a gas station or something, right? They're not gonna wanna have a tenant putting these tanks in, and because they become the only tenant. Like, what do you do after that? If they move out, how are you gonna lease up the property? And are you gonna be able to do it, or are you gonna have to do a bunch of repairs before anyone can get an occupancy permit? If you were gonna, take over a property that was being used as a mechanic shop and try to turn it into a restaurant, there would be a laundry list of things you'd have to do to get an occupancy permit before people could sit down at a table and order food. Um, So that's
Well,
one.
before the occupancy permit, right? I mean, think about if you're going to do that and you have a building that's a mechanic shop, you have these subterranean lifts, right, that need to be removed. You have the environmental component that you mentioned, but the capital requirement to retrofit that property to be some other use, retail or otherwise, is significant. And you don't see this happen very much because the numbers just don't work, right? You're not going to be able to capture the premium on rents on the back end that you need to justify the upfront capital costs.
So what it comes down to is how much are the leasehold improvements to the property, and do those improvements actually add value, or is it just for the tenant? Like when restaurants come in and they have to do the ansel systems and the fire suppression systems and all this stuff, it's only adding value for restaurants, right? Like if you're an insurance company and you just need a few office, and like a lobby area, that doesn't add any value to you. So, and that's a very
Yeah.
interesting kind of, digging into it. We kind of find there's a line in the sand, so to speak, where it makes sense to purchase versus lease, depending on your business. And I think that's probably why, like car wash is like another one where it's a single user kind of property, and it's like, you know, it's a real estate business, but there's an operation side of it, where um, I'm assuming property owners would be kind of weary of leasing to even a car wash, just with like the water runoff and the soaps and all that type of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, if you're ever trying to buy or lease commercial real estate, whatever your business is, you will often get asked the question, what's the use, right? And what the person is getting at with that question is the use needs to conform with the underlying zoning, right? So if you don't, if you're trying to open a restaurant and you're looking in an area of town that's zoned for industrial, you're spinning your wheels. You're wasting your time. You're in the wrong spot, right? And the same goes for office space and apartments, right? So in commercial real estate, if you're not familiar, the underlying zoning is a major component that ultimately drives what you can and cannot do in a particular location or area.
Yeah, I mean that brings up a whole nother can of worms. We've spent a lot of time getting variances and having properties rezone. Self-storage was at a time like not as popular, and there was like no zoning kind of code for it. It just fell into kind of industrial property, and to get it in more kind of general business territories, you have to go get variances, and you have to go get special use permits to be able to do those build outs. And yeah, so I mean, I think we're kind of all over the place with this. It just kind of sparks all these different things when you start thinking of owner occupied. It really, there's like a whole bunch of different reasons why you would want to do that, and ultimately it comes down to the control. You want to have full control of the property so you can do those things. Like if you're like trying to get your landlord to, go get you a variance or a special use so you can be located on the property, like, you're going to have a much harder time finding a location.
Yep. Exactly. Control is exactly that. Control of the operations, but also control of your occupancy costs. We've seen it play out fantastically the last 15, 20 years or so. Someone will sign a lease, and by the time it expires, the market's moved 15, 20% in some major MSAs, and they're staring down the barrel of a lease renewal that's significantly higher than what they were paying. So you saw just natural migration where those that had stable businesses, right? If you're a high growth business and you got, 10 people today and you think you're going to have 50 people, in the next 18 months, owning is not for you, right? Stick to the lease, sign short-term leases, maintain that flexibility. But if you're a mature, stable operation, right, you have a general sense of where you are today, where you're going, owning becomes really, really attractive because again, you have that control from an operation and cost perspective, but now the leadership or the owner, whatever that entity structure is, you're looking at it as a way to build wealth, right? Build equity through the property appreciation and the loan pay down. If you buy a larger building, you can, as long as you have, call it 51%, you can always lease out the balance of it to other tenants, right? So you have some additional income to offset some of those obligations. And the tax benefits are significant. We've talked about it repeatedly on the pod about the tax incentives that real estate has. So there's a lot of really cool, really strong incentives for business owners to own and control the real estate. I think it also depends, what market you're in, right? I mean, I'm speaking from Southern California specifically. I mean, we are a mature infill market. There's not a lot of dirt to go develop into something new, right? So, costs values are always going up, generally speaking. If you're in the middle of nowhere, middle America, and there's just vacant land for as far as the eye can see, maybe that's a little bit different of a decision-making process. So it's, that just goes to say it's not a one size fits all. It's not a, one and done answer, but there's definitely some benefits both direction.
Yeah, I think when you mentioned the tax benefits, that's the most probably compelling reason why you would want to do that is one, you're going to be able to essentially get cheaper money. You're going to be able to borrow against your property. We know the benefits of that. If you're a business that doesn't own any property, you're getting a business loan. So you're going to get a higher rate. You're going to be able to draw less money. It's going to be a lot easier if you own the property. Just one kind of quick story. There was back on the East Coast, on Aquidneck Island where West Main Storage was, there was a guy who built a property and he operated a franchise. I think it was a Subway or something out of it, and then leased some space. And that's like a very good strategy because if you're just going to be operating some kind of franchise business for 20, 30 years, what do you have after the business, after all that time in business, right? You have some kitchen equipment, you got some, beat up furniture and some fixtures in the store, and you didn't really build any equity, right? Maybe you have a reputation of running a good franchise, you're a good franchisee, but a lot of times if you buy real estate for your business, that becomes the core business in a way. It becomes you're saving so much money, you're getting the appreciation, you're getting the interest payment deductions, the accelerated depreciation. It's just and I've seen people who start off with an operating business in the real estate, right? And then they get out of that business and they lease out the space, and now they're just in real estate.
Yep.
So I think it's also a doorway into being a commercial real estate landlord.
All too familiar. I think I want to continue on this talking point, but I think Tim has a message for us in the meantime.
Quick note for property owners listening to the show. If today's discussion sparked questions about how these strategies might relate to your own building or portfolio, we're always happy to have a conversation. No sales pitch, just a thoughtful discussion about your property, your capital structure, and the options available in today's market. You can find our contact information in the
There we go. Welcome back.
Tim, you changed really fast.
You know, it's a hard job. If you're ever wondering what I'm doing over here, I'm just constantly changing outfits.
Yeah, Kenny, I think your point is your last point there was important. I mean, it acts as it's a gateway drug, right? Where what are you doing after the the business, whether it's a side hustle or it becomes your full-time gig. I mean, I've seen it happen multiple times over, and even if you don't become a real estate entrepreneur or investor, if you hold the real estate long enough, right? Like right now, I work with baby boomers that have owned their industrial assets since the 90s, and maybe sometimes even further back than that. And the real estate is by far their largest asset. It's significantly more than the business. It's 3, 4, 5x in a lot of the scenarios. And that is a very, very common conversation. It's like, hey, you got a really good business here. You've been working it for 30, 40 years. Maybe it's a generational business. Nothing wrong with it. But your real estate is worth 3x the business. Right. So that's a common conversation that people are having in the market is, what do I do with the business? What do I do with the real estate? The business question is interesting because we're, in the time period that we're in, the fourth turning, the innovation, the automation, consumer demands, all these big macro trends really make you think long and hard and strategically about the long-term viability of some of these legacy businesses, right? Is my son or daughter going to take it over and going to be able to be competitive over the next 20 years, 30 years like I was, right? I mean, that is a very, very big question right now. And again, there's no, right or wrong answer. It's a very specific situation, and you got to work through it. But understanding the durability of the business versus the real estate is critical. And like I said, a lot of the times the real estate is the largest asset, and needs to be approached with some thoughtfulness.
How you just kind of summed that up kind of nice, and it got me thinking, we're West Main Self Storage is purchasing digital credit from Strategy, and that's right now only 3% of our NOI, but it could easily start snowballing as we allocate more to it, and obviously Bitcoin as well. So right now we have 3.5, a little over 3.5 Bitcoin, 3.6 as of today, March 23rd. But that value is only maybe 1 to 2% of the equity in our real estate. And eventually it could be the opposite, right? Where the real estate is 1-2% of the equity, and the Bitcoin is the majority of the business, right? Like the same thing that happens to operating businesses with real estate. Real estate's going to kind of compress and fall into digital products like Bitcoin being like the digital capital, and then digital credit on top of it. Right now it's just a hybrid kind of model, and it's heavy on the real estate side, light on the Bitcoin, and that's how we're set up. But I could easily see that, over time, we'll meet our targets and we'll be 10% Bitcoin, 90% real estate, and then eventually 50% Bitcoin, 50% real estate. And not that we're gonna sell our real estate, because that's our core business. That's what we know, and that's how we'll think moving forward. Like if we decide at some point we're gonna offer some kind of digital credit of our own, some private digital credit perhaps, that would mimic the returns of physical real estate. If we were to build a self-storage facility in cyberspace that returns the same amount of cash flow, but it's more tax efficient, that's how I see this going, is where um, these businesses, these operating businesses, and different types of real estate properties, whether you're your car wash, whether you're a textile manufacturer, whether you're a self-storage facility, you're going to start saying, hey, like maybe I can pair my business with Bitcoin and digital credit, and I can offer a similar return and use the Bitcoin as the appreciation component, and other digital credit products that Strategy and others are offering as the cash flow component, and the real estate becomes the physical property that ties you to like the physical world, also lets you borrow against traditional finance and fund these other income streams. So I think like you said, it's a gateway, like how operating businesses can be a gateway for commercial real estate. Commercial real estate is going to be a gateway for digital real estate. And so I think we're at, and you mentioned about, real estate operators wanting their pass down their business to their children, or even just operators as a second gen commercial real estate developer and operator. You have to get creative, because you mentioned there's hardly any dirt around in California. It's gonna be a retrofit. If you're gonna buy a property, you're gonna either dismantle or retrofit the property, and you have to get really creative, because we're running out of space, and the next frontier is digital. So
Yeah, you're exactly well said. I mean, that's you're really kind of hitting on the entire premise of the why we spun up this pod in the first place, right? Is exploring the intersection of commercial real estate and digital real estate, and how the heck do you navigate it, right? I mean, I keep the one thing I keep saying to to newbies or normies that are asking what the heck I'm up to, it's like real estate has done an incredible job the last 30 plus years at resisting change and resisting innovation. Well, this time is different, because real estate is used for two primary things. One is collateral, and the other is money. And Bitcoin does both of those better. So it's real estate's turn to get disrupted, right? Just like the taxi cab industry and Uber, just like the retailers and Amazon, right? Go down the list. Real estate's just the latest. We're probably last in line, along with the banks, right? And now we're going to see who's willing to think differently and adopt some new strategies to get through this transitionary period.
yeah, I think if you like zoom, into the future a little bit, you're gonna see that people that have a digital real estate plan, that have a Bitcoin plan, they're gonna be able to offer more for these properties. And the guys that are resisting this change are gonna say, how are they offering that? How am I getting outbidded on all these properties? Well, to a Bitcoiner, your cash flow is worth 30% more to us than it is to the old guy that's not adapting, right? If we're able to draw down on that excess equity that's trapped in a property, or for that owner it's trapped, right? For the new operator, they can have way more favorable loan to value ratios and DSCRs, debt service coverage ratios, right? Because they have these additional revenue streams that are basically invisible to these older operators that are not adapting. It's basically the same thing as is them. There was operators that didn't want to get a website when the internet was taken off. They're like, I don't need a website. I got a great location. But then
Yep.
their traffic counts might have been impacted, or there's just certain things that location alone doesn't compensate for. And yeah, I think it's gonna flip everything on its head. We're gonna see like a whole new wave of real estate developers thinking outside the box, where they're okay, they're raising, we see the Cardone guys, not that they're developing. I think they do some retrofits with some of their apartment complexes, but they're raising more money than they need essentially to buy Bitcoin to provide, additional appreciation and coverage for their loans. So I think we're going to see all these, like, that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? You're going to see a whole bunch of creative entrepreneurs come into the space and replicate cash flows digitally.
Yeah, they're going to have to, is what it comes down to. And I mean, again, if you're a business owner out there, a small or medium-sized business owner, and you're listening to this conversation and trying to think through your own real estate situation, again, owning is not a bad thing. Even in today's world, I think there's going to be some tremendous opportunities to pick up some high quality properties at attractive basis. But once you've done that, you need to implement strategies that Kenny and I are talking about here into not only your business but your real estate, right? And that's a Bitcoin reserve treasury. It's digital rent. It's Bitcoin financing mechanisms, right? All these different topics and strategies essentially to make the real estate more resilient. I mean, the real estate in this scenario is your engine, right? It's responsible for housing your business, right? That has its own income streams. It has its own implications. And then there's the real estate side as well. And the free cash flow that this thing is spitting off, it is allowing you to go acquire Bitcoin or any of these adjacent products to, become more resilient. That's what it is. There's one thing I want to say too on that note, actually. If you are an owner operator, there is, we've touched on the 51%. 51% of the building or more, that is a requirement if you're going to get what's called an SBA loan, Small Business Administration. These are special loans reserved for owner occupants. So the benefit is you're getting a lower down payment than you would be in a conventional loan. So a conventional loan is minimum 20%, often 30 or even 40% down. The SBA loans allow you to acquire a property for 10% down. So that's really important. Again, if you're a business owner that's trying to manage your free cash flow, keeping, essentially 10% of it, available for operational needs as opposed to tying it up in real estate, that's meaningful, right? Another thing with the SBA loan is you have a fixed interest rate for a 10 to 20 year period. That is not the norm with a conventional loan. A conventional real estate loan is fixed for 5 to 7 years, maybe 10 on the high end if you're lucky, but traditionally it's 5 to 7 years. So again, the SBA loan program, it's put out by the Small Business Administration, is the primary mechanism that small and medium-sized business owners are utilizing to acquire real estate. And once you've acquired the real estate, if there is like a tenant improvement component, right? You want to do some renovations to the property. You can actually finance those tenant improvements as part of that acquisition loan or outside of that acquisition loan through the same program. And again, the rates are competitive. It's probably the primary vehicle that business owners are using for real estate acquisition.
Like you said, the SBA can be pricey. It's going to be a few points higher. We typically see 10-year kind of terms amortized over 20, 25 years. And, that's normally pretty good. But I mean, you never know. One thing I wanted to kind of mention, before we kind of move too far past it, but the digital tenants, right? In times of uncertainty and war, we're seeing conflict in the Middle East once again, in Iran, and it got us thinking about our tenants. We're going through our tenant list, who, because not for self storage necessarily. We have retail shopping centers and other commercial properties that we own in our portfolio, and so it's predominantly those tenants that we're kind of keeping an eye on. We lease to restaurants, nail salons, those types of businesses, karate studios, and when you have these kind of conflicts and you have uncertainty and we could be going into a recession or those kind of things, you start thinking about your tenant mix. And the one tenant that is you know going to be less impacted is the digital tenant, right? I mean, you might see some movement in price, during that uncertainty, but Stretch is going to keep paying the dividends, right? Like the digital rent instruments, they have cash reserves to make it through these periods of uncertainty. So you have diversification between your tenant mix, and it's diversifying physical kind of brick and mortar tenants with digital tenants, which is an unbelievable risk adjusted way to proceed in times like this.
Exactly. We talked about it, I think last week or maybe the week before on the pod. But when you think about your cash management, right? When we started this whole thing, Kenny, we were talking about U.S. dollars and spot Bitcoin. Right now, today we're talking about U.S. dollars, STRC, and spot Bitcoin. Right. So as a small operator, you can tranche out your cash flow, your treasury, right? Your, call it 30 to 90 day operational needs, US dollars in a checking account, right? Pretty straightforward. Your medium term tranche of capital, the 120 to whatever, 9 months, 12-month capital, put that in Stretch, right? It's liquid, it's paying you monthly, you're good to go. And then your long-term, year plus capital is your spot Bitcoin, right? And that's you as an operator, you can weather the volatility in the underlying asset a lot better. You can sleep better at night. At the same time, you can build that spot Bitcoin reserve over time to improve the property, do your capital expenditures, your renovations, grow the portfolio, give yourself optionality in the new world that we're going into, whatever that may be.
Yeah, that works really good for like big capex expenses. Like if you're planning on doing your parking lots or roofs or HVAC equipment in the next, say, 2 to 5 years, you could actually have a substantial portion of that capex paid for by these dividend payments, right? By these return of capital dividend payments. And so you're going to be making your money work a little bit harder, and you're going to see how much you're really leaving on the table, and that you can really squeeze the rag a little bit more and get these other forms of cash flow and really get the best use out of your property.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, every time I talk to a property owner, maybe they're, whether they're considering leasing something, they got a vacancy, or they're looking at selling, whatever it may be, they always want, your opinion, right? What are your thoughts? Where's the hair on this deal, essentially? And when you bring up the deferred maintenance components, right, that you're alluding to here, 9 out of 10 times, it's not that they don't want to maintain and improve the property, right? They want to do that. The reason they don't is because they can't, right? They cannot afford to. They don't have the ability to build and maintain those reserves that are needed to do those kinds of improvements. So it's just and that as you guys know, that kind of comes full circle to this whole underlying thesis. So yeah, I won't beat the horse there, but it's crazy how it's this full 360 degree circle, and we end up at the same place after you poke you go down all these different rabbit holes.
Yeah, it's going to take some time to reflect on today's episode, but I think, all roads lead to Bitcoin, the orange brick road. And
The orange brick road, exactly.
And I think it's going to become more apparent. I mean, there's just going to be less places for you to park your cash, right? And it's going to be more aggressive operators that come in and willing to take the chance and willing to do the homework and willing to add it to their portfolios. And we're just going to see this out of performance, and we got front row seats, and we're going to be here to guide the real estate Bitcoin people through it. So it's very exciting times.
Any closing thoughts for episode 13, Kenny and Chris?
I
think that was mine. What about you?
I think we kind of covered it all, but closing thoughts. Don't be afraid to be creative. Start small. Take one of these strategies that Kenny and I are talking about here, and dip your toe in the water. You don't have to bet the farm on any of it. But what you can do is you can spend the time to, don't take us for our word, right? Go do your own homework and come to your own conclusions. And then whatever you deem, the starting point for yourself, start small, right? Go, buy $100 a week in Bitcoin, or go, put a, 1% allocation into Stretch and just start to play around with it. And do that. Have that learning experience for yourself. And from there, you're going to come up with your own ideas, how to apply it to your business and how to apply it to your real estate.
Awesome. Well, that is it for today's episode. If this conversation was useful, please share it with a partner, a client, or somebody that's making decisions in the marketplace. New episodes are dropping weekly. Until next time, stay disciplined. Think long term. That's a big one. And stack sats. This is the Real Estate Standard.
If you enjoyed today's conversation and you own commercial real estate, we'd encourage you to think about how these broader shifts might impact your own property over the next decade. Many owners are starting to reconsider how they structure their balance sheets, manage capital, and position their assets for the future. If you'd like to explore how some of these ideas might apply to your own situation, you're welcome to reach out. We work with property owners and investors to think through strategy, structure, and long-term positioning in a rapidly changing market. You can find our contact information in the show